March 1941. The vast Mare Island Naval Shipyard, sprawling across 635 acres of Vallejo, California, was a cacophony of ambition and mounting apprehension. Against the backdrop of the Napa River, the rhythmic clang of hammers, the high-pitched whine of machinery, and the guttural roar of furnaces painted a sonic landscape of urgent industry. Yet, beneath this veneer of tireless activity, a profound inefficiency gnawed at the heart of America's burgeoning war effort. The air, thick with the metallic tang of new construction and the acrid smoke of welding, also carried the faint, unsettling scent of an approaching global conflagration. Deep within the cavernous construction bays were the skeletal frameworks of submarines, slowly matured into Leviathan hulls. A welder named Edward Nelson wrestled not merely with molten steel, but with a corrosive sense of frustration. His welding torch, a brilliant, defiant spark against the perpetual twilight of the hull's interior, seemed to mock the archaic methods that choked progress. His hand, calloused from years of gripping tools, moved with practiced precision, but his mind raced beyond the immediate task. "There has to be a better way," he scrawled in a worn, grease-stained notebook, his words a silent, almost desperate cry against the deafening roar of convention. "This is madness." Nelson had just emerged from the suffocating, claustrophobic maze of scaffolding that choked the interior compartments beneath a submarine's wooden deck. What he had witnessed there, for the 100th time, ignited a slow burn of impotent rage. A full dozen workers, a significant investment in manpower for an entire 8-hour shift, were consumed by the painstaking process of installing a single, relatively small section of deck planking. Below, within the submarine's belly, enormous, precarious scaffolding structures had to be meticulously erected, filling every available cubic foot of space. On these wobbly platforms, men contorted their bodies in cramped, dimly lit caverns, their knuckles perpetually scraped, twisting nuts onto bolts that had been painstakingly lowered through holes drilled from above. Hours, days, even weeks bled away in this excruciatingly slow ritual of bolting timber to steel. The traditional method, a legacy unchanged since the First World War, demanded a glacial precision, a meticulous patience, and, most critically, a luxury of time that America simply did not possess. Each ticking clock hand, each wasted man-hour, was a concession to a looming enemy. War clouds, dark and ominous, gathered swiftly over the Pacific, and the United States Navy desperately needed ships in the water, not stuck in dry dock, entangled in a web of archaic attachment methods. Yet here, in what was destined to become one of the world's busiest and most vital shipyards, the techniques remained frozen in a bygone era. Theodore Edward Nelson, 36 years old and California-born, was not a man of lofty academic degrees or inherited privilege. His mechanical knowledge, profound and intuitive, had been forged in the crucible of experience. For 15 hard years, he had toiled in machine shops across California, his hands learning the nuanced language of metal, how it behaved under stress, how electricity flowed through it, how complex problems could be unraveled if only someone would listen. His deep understanding of metallurgy, electrical circuits, and fabrication techniques made him an exceptional welder, fast and precise. But it was his restless mind, constantly observing and questioning, that truly set him apart. He possessed a rare blend of practical skill and visionary insight. What none of his Navy supervisors, steeped in the rigid protocols and time-honored, if inefficient procedures of the institution, failed to grasp was that this seemingly ordinary welder, earning his $11 a day, already held the astonishingly simple key to their most critical bottleneck. And what Nelson himself, toiling away in obscurity, could not yet fathom was that his audacious dismissed solution, born of sheer frustration and genius, would soon liberate over 50 million invaluable man-hours for the United States Navy, fundamentally altering the blueprint and accelerating the pace of naval construction forever. The seismic transformation, unseen by most, had already begun its quiet revolution weeks earlier, in the cramped, grimy interior spaces below decks, where the real, unacknowledged war against inefficiency was being fought every single day. The date was March 15, 1941, precisely 8 months and 22 days before the devastating, history-altering attack on Pearl Harbor. Mare Island, a crucible of wartime industry. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, established in 1854 by the legendary Commander David Glasgow Farragut, was the first United States Navy base on the Pacific Ocean. By early 1941, it had evolved into the premier West Coast submarine construction facility, a sprawling, vital nerve center of American naval power. The yard was a hive of frantic activity, operating around the clock with 3 shifts of workers 7 days a week. The pace of submarine construction had accelerated dramatically, driven by the steadily mounting tensions with Imperial Japan. In early 1941, the yard hummed with the energy of approximately 12,000 civilian workers, a number that would eventually swell to an astonishing nearly 5,000 by 1944, a small city of industry dedicated to the war effort. Among those 12,000 workers was Ted Nelson, proudly bearing employee number 3872. He earned his $11 per day, a decent wage for the time, working the day shift from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. His primary role was welding, focusing on the intricate hulls and internal structures of the burgeoning submarine fleet. He was good at his work, exceptionally fast and precise, a true master of his craft. Yet, with each passing day, his frustration mounted, fueled by the glaring, almost criminal inefficiency he observed everywhere. The problem, as he saw it, permeated every aspect of construction, but nowhere was it more pronounced than in the installation of wooden deck planking on submarines, destroyers, and even the gargantuan aircraft carriers. The Navy specified wooden decks for several crucial reasons. Wood offered superior traction to steel in wet conditions, preventing dangerous slips. It was quieter underfoot, reducing noise for crew movement in stealthy submarines. It provided some insulation against the cold steel beneath, and in the event of fire or battle damage, wooden decks could be more easily repaired or replaced than welded steel plates. The material itself was sound, even necessary. The fatal flaw lay entirely in the attachment method. It was an archaic, labor-intensive, and agonizingly slow procedure. The standard, unchanged since the First World War, proceeded in a series of complicated, time-consuming steps. First, skilled workers would painstakingly drill hundreds, sometimes thousands of holes through the thick wooden planks, precisely measured and spaced. These holes would then be countersunk, allowing the heads of the attachment bolts to sit flush with the deck surface, creating a smooth, trip-free expanse. Next, the massive, unwieldy planks would be carefully maneuvered and positioned onto the steel deck framework. Then came the true nightmare, the bottleneck that choked production. Workers were forced to construct extensive, multi-tiered scaffolding structures beneath the deck, within the cramped, often dark and poorly ventilated interior compartments of the submarine or ship. Multiple levels of platforms, meticulously erected and secured, were required to give workers precarious access to the underside of the steel deck framework. Once this temporary forest of scaffolding was in place, an elaborate, often frustrating ballet of coordination began. Workers on the top side would carefully insert long threaded bolts down through the wooden planks and through corresponding, precisely aligned holes in the steel framework. Below, standing on the scaffolding platforms in spaces barely 4 feet high, often bending at severe angles, other workers would then painstakingly thread nuts onto the protruding bolt ends. They would tighten these nuts with heavy wrenches, pulling the wooden planks firmly against the steel framework above. Finally, back on the top side, workers would fill the countersunk holes with wooden plugs, sanding them flush to create that smooth, finished deck surface. The entire cumbersome process was repeated for every single section of decking. On a submarine, there might be several hundred square feet of wooden decking, requiring thousands of individual attachment points. On an aircraft carrier, the wooden flight deck covered tens of thousands of square feet, demanding an astronomical number of these connections. The labor requirements were staggering, bordering on absurd. A typical submarine deck installation alone required a dedicated crew of 12 to 16 men, toiling for 5 to 7 days. The scaffolding, a temporary but essential evil, consumed 2 full days just to construct and another day to dismantle. The actual bolt installation, though lengthy, consumed only the remaining time. Ted Nelson had personally performed this soul-crushing work dozens of times. He had spent countless hours stooped, kneeling, or lying on his back on those infernal scaffolding platforms, threading nuts onto bolts in submarine compartments so low and narrow they felt like coffins. His back ached with a chronic, deep-seated pain from the constant bending. His knuckles were permanently scarred from wrenches that had slipped in the gloom. His patience, a virtue he usually possessed in abundance, was utterly exhausted. But more than personal discomfort drove his mounting frustration. He possessed the foresight to see the bigger, more terrifying picture. War was not just coming, it was upon them. Everyone at Mare Island knew it, felt it in their bones. The yard was already lagging significantly behind schedule on critical submarine construction. The Navy desperately needed boats in the water, patrolling the seas, not sitting idly in dry dock, waiting for an antiquated deck installation method to slowly grind along. Every single day of delay was a day closer to a conflict for which America was still fundamentally unprepared. And Ted Nelson, a common welder with an uncommon mind, knew with absolute certainty there was a better way. The epiphany and the bureaucratic wall. For months, the problem had gnawed at Nelson, an intractable puzzle turning over and over in his mind during the long, monotonous hours of routine welding work. The solution, when it finally arrived, seemed so breathtakingly simple, so utterly obvious, that he almost laughed aloud. Instead of the cumbersome process of bolting from above and threading nuts from below, why not simply weld attachment studs directly to the steel framework? And crucially, weld from one side only, from above. This simple paradigm shift eliminated the need for scaffolding entirely, rendering nuts and bolts obsolete, freeing workers from cramped, dark compartments below. It promised fast, strong, permanent welds with unprecedented efficiency. The concept was elegant. A threaded stud, essentially a headless bolt, could be fused to the steel deck framework in a mere fraction of a second. The wooden planks would then have pre-drilled holes fitted with threaded inserts or specialized nuts, allowing them to be quickly and securely attached to these studs from the top side only. The entire operation, from start to finish, could be performed by a single worker standing comfortably on the deck. No scaffolding, no perilous below-deck work, no complex coordination between crews above and below. Nelson had encountered stud welding before, in a limited, rudimentary form. The technology existed, primarily for horizontal flat plate welding applications. A small pile of flux powder would be placed on a flat steel surface, a stud positioned within the flux, and an electrical arc would then fuse the stud to the steel. But this method was inherently restrictive. The loose flux powder would simply fall away from vertical or overhead surfaces, rendering it useless for most naval construction, which required welding in all positions and at all angles. This fundamental limitation had stumped welding engineers and metallurgists for 20 long years. How to make stud welding work on non-horizontal surfaces. Nelson believed he had the answer, and it was deceptively simple. Instead of loose flux powder, why not encase the flux in a small, pre-formed ceramic cap? Attach this cap directly to the end of the stud. The ceramic cap would hold the flux securely in place, regardless of the stud's orientation, whether vertical, overhead, or angled. Upon arc initiation, the ceramic would shatter, allowing the molten metal to flow and fuse the stud to the steel with a strong, permanent bond. He immediately sketched his groundbreaking idea in his worn notebook. A handheld welding gun designed with a pistol grip for ease of use. A spring-loaded mechanism within the gun would press the stud firmly against the steel surface. An electrical trigger would initiate the welding arc, and crucially, a disposable ceramic flux cap would be attached to the end of each stud. The entire operation would take less than 1 second per stud. One worker, he realized, could install dozens of studs in the time it currently took to install a single bolted connection. The implications were staggering. Buoyed by this revelatory solution, Nelson, ever the protocol-following employee, took his idea to his direct supervisor, a Navy lieutenant named Morrison. The meeting, to Nelson's dismay, lasted less than 5 minutes. Morrison, a man seemingly ossified by routine, barely cast a glance at Nelson's crude but brilliant sketches. "We have established procedures, Mr. Nelson," Morrison intoned, his voice devoid of curiosity or concern. "We follow Navy specifications. If you want to weld instead of supervising bolt installation, stick to your current assignments." It was a curt dismissal, a brick wall of bureaucracy. Undeterred, Nelson tried again, seeking out the shipyard's chief welding engineer, a civilian contractor named Hartwell, a man he hoped might possess a more open, engineering-focused mind. Nelson passionately explained the immense time savings, the drastic reduction in labor, the complete elimination of expensive and cumbersome scaffolding costs. Hartwell listened, more politely than Morrison, but was ultimately equally dismissive. "Son," he said, with an air of weary condescension, "people a lot smarter than you and me have been trying to solve this problem for 2 decades. If it was that easy, someone would have done it already." He continued, enumerating the insurmountable hurdles. "Besides, the Navy has specifications. We cannot just change procedures because a welder has an idea. You need approval from the Bureau of Ships in Washington. You need extensive engineering studies. You need prototype testing. That takes years." Nelson, his voice edged with desperation, protested, "We do not have years. We need submarines now." Hartwell merely shrugged, a gesture of defeat and resignation. "That is not my problem, Mr. Nelson. My problem is building boats according to approved specifications. Your problem is doing the welding work you are paid to do." Nelson left the meeting not just angry, but deeply disillusioned. He had offered them a solution that promised to save thousands of man-hours per submarine, a breakthrough of immense strategic value. They had dismissed him without a shred of serious consideration, not because his idea was flawed, not because it wouldn't work, but because he was just a welder, because changing procedures meant navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth of paperwork and approvals, because innovation, however vital, was deemed less important than blindly adhering to established stagnant protocols. In a final, desperate attempt, he penned a formal letter to the shipyard commander, Captain Thomas Withers. The letter was carefully composed, meticulously detailing the current inefficiencies, proposing his revolutionary stud-welding solution, and providing conservative estimates of the colossal time and cost savings. He submitted the letter through the proper channels, following the established procedure for worker suggestions, clinging to a sliver of hope that a higher authority might recognize the profound potential. 3 weeks later, he received a form letter. It politely thanked him for his interest in improving shipyard efficiency, offered a platitudinal explanation that all technical proposals were evaluated by the Bureau of Ships Engineering Review Board, and noted that his suggestion had been forwarded for consideration. The grim, realistic assessment stated that the review process typically took 18 to 24 months. He would be notified, it concluded, if his proposal was approved for further study. 18 to 24 months. By then, the war, which everyone knew was coming, might already be over. Or, far worse, lost. Nelson crumpled the letter, a symbol of stifled brilliance and systemic inertia, and threw it into the waste bin. That evening, standing in the dim light of his modest garage, he made a decision that would not only irrevocably alter his own life, but also fundamentally change the course of naval history. If the Navy, with its ingrained conservatism and suffocating bureaucracy, would not listen to him, he would build it himself. He would prove his concept worked. Then, and only then, would they be forced to pay attention. Parfois. From garage to groundbreaking. The birth of a revolution. Nelson cleared a dedicated space in the garage behind his small cottage in Vallejo, transforming it into a makeshift workshop. His wife, Emma, a woman of quiet strength and deep concern, watched with a worried frown as he began collecting scrap steel, scavenged components, and his own personal welding equipment. "Ted," she warned softly, her voice laced with apprehension, "you are going to get yourself fired. You are supposed to be working on Navy projects, not your own inventions." Nelson, his eyes alight with a fierce determination, replied with a conviction that brooked no argument, "This will help the Navy, Emma. They just do not know it yet." Over the ensuing weeks, working tirelessly through evenings and weekends, often long into the night, Nelson poured every ounce of his ingenuity and mechanical expertise into constructing his first prototype stud welding gun. The design was crude, a testament to his limited resources, but remarkably functional. It featured a robust pistol grip handle, allowing for comfortable and stable operation. A clever spring-loaded plunger mechanism was engineered to securely hold the stud and press it firmly against the steel surface during the welding process. An electrical trigger, connected to his welding power supply, initiated the crucial welding arc, and a quick-release mechanism allowed for rapid loading of new studs. The most critical innovation, however, lay in the ceramic flux cap. This was the heart of his invention, the element that solved the decades-old problem. He painstakingly experimented with a dizzying array of different ceramic materials, varied flux compositions, and countless cap designs. After dozens of iterative tests, each one a step closer to perfection, he finally developed a cap that not only held the flux securely in place regardless of the welding position, but also allowed for proper, controlled arc initiation and, crucially, could be manufactured cheaply and efficiently on a large scale. By May 1941, he had a fully working prototype. He subjected it to a rigorous battery of tests, trying it on scrap steel in every imaginable position, horizontal, vertical, overhead, at challenging angles. The gun performed flawlessly. A stud could be welded in less than 1 second, a blink of an eye compared to the minutes required for a single bolted connection. The weld strength, to his immense satisfaction, not only met but exceeded that of traditional through bolts. And most importantly, it required absolutely no below-surface access, no scaffolding, no cramped working conditions. He brought the prototype to work, a small act of defiance, and during a lunch break, demonstrated it to several of his fellow welders. They gathered around, their skepticism quickly melting into astonishment and excitement. "This is going to save us so much time," one exclaimed, his eyes wide with understanding. "You need to show this to Morrison," another suggested, momentarily forgetting their supervisor's obstinacy. Nelson shook his head. "I already showed Morrison. He wasn't interested." A third welder, seeing the revolutionary potential, offered a bold piece of advice. "Then quit and start your own company. Sell your gun to shipyards across the country. You'll make a fortune." The idea had not consciously occurred to Nelson, the humble welder. He was an artisan, a mechanic, not a businessman. He had no capital, no manufacturing facility, no experience in commerce. But the more he mulled it over, the more undeniable sense it made. If the Navy, bound by its own rigid internal logic, wouldn't use his invention, perhaps private shipyards, driven by profit and the urgency of the times, would. He knew the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond were hiring at a frenetic pace. The Bethlehem Steel Shipyard in San Francisco was expanding rapidly. There were shipyards up and down the entire West Coast, all grappling with the same crippling labor shortages and relentless production pressures. They all needed a solution. On June 20th, 1941, Ted Nelson, with a mixture of trepidation and fierce resolve, submitted his resignation to Mare Island Naval Shipyard. His supervisor, Morrison, true to form, tried to talk him out of it, seeing only the folly of a man abandoning a secure job for an uncertain dream. "Nelson, you are a good welder. Don't throw away a steady job for some crazy invention." But Nelson's mind was irrevocably made up. "I am going to build welding guns," he calmly informed Morrison, "and when the Navy comes back asking to buy them, I hope you remember this conversation." He walked out of Mare Island, leaving behind his $11 a day job, with just $11 in his pocket, a garage full of tools, and an unshakable conviction that his invention would succeed. On July 1st, 1941, he formally incorporated the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation. Through sheer persistence, he secured a $95,000 loan from the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, a government lending agency established during the Depression to support small businesses. With this vital capital, he rented a small, unassuming workshop in Vallejo and began the arduous process of manufacturing his groundbreaking stud-welding guns. The first months were an uphill battle, fraught with difficulty and uncertainty. He had no established customers, no industry reputation, no distribution network. Nelson tirelessly made sales calls to local machine shops and small fabrication companies, personally demonstrating his gun, meticulously explaining the immense time savings and efficiency benefits. Most were skeptical, clinging to their familiar methods, wary of an untested innovation. A few, however, were intrigued enough to try a demonstration unit. Slowly, painfully slowly, orders began to trickle in. By September 1941, he had managed to sell 18 welding guns and several thousand of his patented flux cap studs. It was a start, a fragile foothold in a competitive world, Pearl Harbor and the turning tide. Then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changed. Pearl Harbor. The devastating surprise attack by the Japanese Imperial Navy annihilated or severely damaged 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and 188 aircraft. Over 2,400 Americans perished. The United States was, overnight, plunged into total war. Suddenly, shipbuilding was not merely important, it was an existential imperative, a matter of national survival. Within days of the attack, the shipbuilding industry exploded into a frenzy of activity. The Kaiser shipyards, legendary for their speed, began building Liberty ships at an unprecedented, almost miraculous pace. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Nelson's former employer, received emergency orders for a massive increase in submarine construction. Bethlehem Steel and other private yards immediately shifted to working triple shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every single one of these facilities, from the largest to the smallest, faced the same monumental problem: how to build ships fast enough. The traditional methods, once merely inefficient, were now seen as criminally slow, too labor-intensive, too wasteful of precious, irreplaceable time. Ted Nelson's phone began ringing incessantly. Shipyard purchasing agents who had dismissed his invention with a condescending wave of the hand just weeks earlier were now desperately vying to place large orders. The Kaiser shipyard, sensing the revolution, ordered 50 welding guns and 10,000 studs. Bethlehem Steel, equally urgent, ordered 40 guns. Even Mare Island Naval Shipyard, where he'd been ignominiously rebuffed just months prior, placed a substantial order for 60 guns and 2,000 studs. Morrison, his former supervisor, handled the purchase requisition. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that Nelson had been right all along, just a terse official order and a demand for prompt delivery. By January 1942, less than 1 month after Pearl Harbor, Nelson's small workshop in Vallejo could no longer keep pace with the overwhelming surge in demand. He was receiving orders faster than he could possibly manufacture products. It became clear he needed a real factory, more workers, better equipment. He quickly leased a much larger facility in San Leandro, a few miles south of Oakland. The building, isolated and unimpressive, sat in the middle of a cornfield, but it offered ample space, sufficient power, and crucial room for future expansion. By March 1942, he employed 20 workers. By June, that number had swelled to 50. By September, 150. The factory, like the shipyards it served, operated around the clock 7 days a week. Welding guns rolled off the assembly line at a furious rate of 30 per day. Stud production reached thousands per day. Every major shipyard on the West Coast was now using Nelson stud welding equipment, and the reports pouring back were nothing short of extraordinary. A submarine deck installation that had previously required 12 workers and 6 agonizing days could now be completed by just 3 workers in a single day. The complete elimination of scaffolding alone saved 2 additional days and, crucially, freed those dozens of skilled workers for other vital tasks. The welds, rigorously tested, were consistently stronger and more reliable than traditional bolted connections. Furthermore, the wooden deck planks, when attached to studs, could be removed and replaced with surprising ease for maintenance or repair, a significant advantage in the long life of a warship. At Mare Island Naval Shipyard, where Nelson had once been dismissed, submarine construction accelerated dramatically. The yard completed 17 submarines between 1941 and 1945, with the average construction time steadily decreasing as new techniques, spearheaded by stud welding, were implemented. Nelson's invention was not the only innovation, of course, but it was a critical foundational piece of the efficiency puzzle, a catalyst for broader change. By mid-1942, the versatility of stud welding became apparent, and its applications rapidly expanded far beyond mere deck attachment. It was used for pipe hangers, cable supports, equipment mounts, bulkhead attachments, and hundreds of other fastening needs. Any situation where a fastener needed to be quickly, strongly, and permanently attached to a steel structure, stud welding provided a superior and faster solution. The Navy Bureau of Ships, which had initially ignored Nelson's proposal, now studied his process with intense scrutiny. Engineering teams meticulously analyzed weld strength, durability, and failure modes under extreme conditions. The results unequivocally confirmed what Nelson had known all along. His welds were not just faster than traditional methods, they were actually superior in strength and reliability, capable of withstanding the immense stresses of combat. On November 19, 1942, just 11 months after leaving his 11-a-day welding job, Ted Nelson received a formal, unannounced visit from a delegation of high-ranking Navy officers. A group of 5 men in impeccably pressed dress uniforms arrived at his bustling San Leandro plant. Captain Harrison, representing the powerful Bureau of Ships, did the talking. Mr. Nelson, we are here to inform you that the Navy has completed its comprehensive evaluation of your stud welding process. We have determined that your invention has saved the United States Navy an estimated 5 million man-hours in submarine and surface ship construction over the past 10 months. He paused, allowing the astonishing figure to sink in. That number is expected to increase substantially as more shipyards fully adopt your technology. Captain Harrison continued, his voice imbued with genuine respect. On behalf of the Secretary of the Navy and the United States government, I am authorized to present you with a citation for exceptional contribution to the war effort. Nelson was utterly stunned. They had rejected his idea, ignored his proposals, effectively forced him to quit his job and risk everything to prove his concept. And now they were giving him a citation, an official acknowledgement of his profound impact. Captain Harrison, a perceptive man, must have seen the complex conflict of emotions on Nelson's face. I understand you submitted a proposal to Mare Island in early 1941, Mr. Nelson. I have reviewed that file. Your proposal was not properly evaluated at the time. That was a mistake, and I apologize on behalf of the Navy. He offered a rare moment of bureaucratic introspection. However, your decision to develop the technology independently has resulted in a faster deployment than would have been possible through the normal procurement process. Sometimes, he concluded, his gaze direct and meaningful, the best way to serve your country is to ignore official channels and just solve the problem. Nelson accepted the citation with a complex mixture of pride in his achievement, deep vindication for his perseverance, but also a lingering frustration at the very bureaucracy that had so nearly prevented this critical innovation from happening at all. The arsenal of democracy forged by sparks. The war continued, escalating in ferocity and global reach. Production demands surged relentlessly. Nelson's company expanded again, opening a second strategically located manufacturing facility in Camden, New Jersey, in March 1943. This East Coast plant efficiently supplied shipyards in vital hubs like New York, Philadelphia, Norfolk, and Charleston. By mid-1943, Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation employed over 400 dedicated workers and generated impressive annual revenue of approximately $4 million. Ted Nelson, despite his burgeoning success, remained remarkably grounded. He still spent 16 hours a day on the factory floor, still dressed in the practical tan pants and shirts of a shop worker. He drew a modest salary of $1,000 per month, eschewing personal extravagance. All profits were diligently reinvested back into expansion, new equipment, and aggressive loan repayment, driven by his unwavering commitment to the war effort. His personal impact, however, was incalculable. The Navy's initial estimate of 5 million man-hours saved by late 1942 was just the tip of the iceberg. As the war progressed and stud welding became standard practice across virtually all naval construction, the time savings multiplied exponentially, reaching truly staggering proportions. By 1943, stud welding was being used not just on submarines, but on the colossal aircraft carriers, the formidable battleships, the sleek cruisers, the agile destroyers, and hundreds of smaller, equally vital vessels. The legendary Essex-class aircraft carriers, built by Newport News Shipbuilding and other yards, utilized Nelson stud welding extensively for flight deck attachment and myriad interior fittings. Each carrier, a floating city of war, required approximately 2,000 studs. The Navy built an astonishing 24 Essex-class carriers during the war, forming the backbone of its Pacific might. The mighty Iowa-class battleships, symbols of American naval power, used stud welding for deck planking, heavy equipment mounts, and even aspects of armor attachment. The Baltimore-class heavy cruisers incorporated the technology throughout their intricate designs. Destroyer escorts, landing ships, patrol boats, virtually every type of naval vessel benefited from the faster, stronger attachment methods Nelson pioneered. But the most dramatic and immediate impact remained in submarine construction. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, the very place where Nelson had once worked, and where his idea had been so short-sightedly rejected, ironically became one of the most efficient submarine builders in the world. The yard constructed 17 submarines during the war, achieving steadily improving construction times with each successive vessel. Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire, however, emerged as the undisputed champion submarine builder, completing an astonishing 79 submarines between July 1940 and July 1945. Portsmouth's unparalleled success was built upon multiple innovations, but stud welding was a critical enabling technology. The yard adopted Nelson's system extensively, using it not just for decking, but throughout the boat's complex interior. The tangible result was visible in unprecedented construction statistics. Portsmouth famously launched 3 submarines simultaneously on January 27, 1944, the USS Redfish, USS Ronquil, and USS Razorback. A 4th submarine, the USS Scabbardfish, launched the very same day. 4 submarines in one day. No shipyard before or since has matched that astounding achievement. At the absolute peak of production, Portsmouth completed 32 submarines in 1944 alone, approximately 1 submarine every 11 days. The Bellagio-class submarines, which constituted the bulk of wartime production, averaged a mere 12 months from keel laying to commissioning at Portsmouth, several months faster than other yards building the same class. Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, built 74 submarines during the war. Manitowoc Shipbuilding in Wisconsin, despite being on the Great Lakes, hundreds of miles from any ocean, constructed 28 submarines that were famously floated down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. Across all yards, the United States built a total of 203 submarines during World War II. Each submarine required thousands of stud-welded attachments. Each stud saved precious minutes of labor time. Multiply those minutes by thousands of studs per submarine, by hundreds of submarines, and the time savings reached truly staggering, almost incomprehensible proportions. But submarines were only one part of the colossal story. The real volume of production, and thus the most massive application of stud welding, was found in surface ships and merchant vessels. The Liberty Ship program, a marvel of wartime industrial planning, managed by the Maritime Commission and built primarily at the Kaiser shipyards, produced an astonishing 2710 cargo ships during the war. Each Liberty ship required approximately 5,000 to 8,000 stud-welded attachments for deck planking, cargo handling equipment, defensive gun mounts, and myriad ship fittings. The faster, more advanced Victory ships, which followed, were built to similar standards, also extensively using the technology. The scale of this production was unprecedented in human history. At the peak of Liberty ship construction in 1943, American shipyards launched 3 new ships every single day, 75 ships per month, an incredible 900 ships per year. This astonishing feat was possible only through radical innovations in construction methods, prefabrication, modular assembly, specialized workers, dedicated tools, and critically faster attachment methods. Stud welding was one piece of this larger revolution in shipbuilding efficiency, but it was an undeniably critical foundational piece. The elimination of scaffolding freed countless workers for other urgent tasks. The unparalleled speed of installation drastically reduced assembly time. The inherent strength and reliability of the welds ensured that these hastily built ships, many constructed in mere weeks, could survive the brutal North Atlantic storms and relentless enemy attacks. By the spring of 1943, the United States Navy, no longer capable of ignoring the undeniable evidence, took formal notice of Nelson's monumental contribution. On May 11, 1943, the Secretary of the Navy officially presented the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation with the prestigious Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in Production. The E Award, created in July 1942, was a supreme recognition for companies whose production facilities achieved outstanding performance in manufacturing war equipment, with excellence in both quality and quantity being the paramount determining factors. Only about 5% of companies engaged in war work received this singular honor. The award comprised a distinctive pennant for the factory and individual pins for all employees. The ceremony was held at the San Leandro plant with full military honors. Navy officers, Army representatives, and local officials attended. The factory workers, Nelson's employees who had toiled through grueling hours to meet relentless production demands, received their pins with immense pride. Ted Nelson, characteristically standing before his workers in his usual unpretentious shop clothes, accepted the pennant and delivered a brief, heartfelt speech. We did not do this for awards or recognition. We did this because our country needed it. Every stud we make, every gun we build, helps bring our sailors and soldiers home safely. That is all the reward we need. But the Navy was not finished recognizing Nelson's extraordinary achievement. Plants that maintained outstanding performance for 6 months after receiving the initial E Award were granted a star to add to their pennant. The Nelson Company earned its first star in November 1943. The second star, signifying continued exceptional performance, came in May 1944. By the end of the war, the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation had proudly earned 2 Army-Navy E Awards with stars, a distinction achieved by only a handful of companies across the entire nation. The official citations specifically noted the estimated 50 million man-hours saved in naval construction, a number that resonated with profound strategic significance. 50 million man-hours. Let that staggering number truly sink in. 50 million hours is approximately equivalent to 5,700 years of continuous labor. If one person worked a standard 8-hour day every single day, it would take over 19,000 years to accumulate that immense amount of time. This colossal time savings, born from one deceptively simple innovation, a spring-loaded welding gun and a ceramic flux cap, translated directly into a tangible accelerating force: ships in the water faster. This meant more submarines aggressively hunting Japanese convoys across the vast Pacific. It meant more destroyers diligently escorting vital convoys across the perilous Atlantic. It meant more aircraft carriers launching decisive airstrikes, turning the tide of battle. It meant more landing ships delivering brave Marines to hostile beaches, enabling amphibious assaults that reshaped global geography. Every ship delivered faster meant more combat power deployed sooner, more critical supplies delivered to the front lines, and ultimately, more lives saved. The strategic impact of this efficiency gain was, quite simply, incalculable. But Nelson's invention had another equally profound and perhaps unexpected benefit. The stud welding process, by its very design, required significantly less skill and training than traditional bolt installation or conventional intricate arc welding. With minimal instruction and practice, new workers, often those entirely new to the rigorous demands of shipyard labor, could perform stud welding operations safely and effectively. This was a crucial advantage as the war progressed and unprecedented labor shortages intensified across the nation. Women, entering the shipyards in unprecedented numbers, became the backbone of the industrial war effort. While the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter symbolized female shipyard workers, there were countless Wendy the Welders whose contributions were equally vital. Women fearlessly operated stud welding guns, installed deck planking, and mounted equipment, quickly becoming highly skilled and indispensable at the process. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, at its peak, employed almost 5,000 workers, including an astonishing 9,000 women. The Kaiser shipyards alone employed hundreds of thousands of people, with women making up nearly 30% of the entire workforce. These women needed tools and processes that could be learned quickly, performed safely, and executed efficiently. Stud welding fit that requirement perfectly, empowering a new generation of industrial workers and fundamentally changing the demographics of the American workforce. By 1944, the tide of war had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. American industrial production, a relentless, unstoppable force, overwhelmed Axis capabilities. The United States built more ships, planes, tanks, and guns than Germany and Japan combined, a testament to its unparalleled manufacturing prowess. The arsenal of democracy, as President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously called it, operated at full, blistering capacity. Ted Nelson's stud welding guns, while seemingly a small part of this massive industrial achievement, were nonetheless a critical component, a tiny spark that ignited a much larger blaze of efficiency. In war, efficiency is not an abstract concept. It is measured directly in lives saved and battles won. Faster ship construction meant more naval power deployed sooner. More naval power meant more Japanese shipping sunk, more strategic islands taken, and ultimately more decisive pressure on the enemy. The submarine campaign in the Pacific Theater starkly demonstrated this principle. American submarines, often operating far from their bases in dangerous waters, sank over 1,000 Japanese merchant ships, totaling approximately 5 million tons, crippling Japan's war economy. They also accounted for the sinking of 1 aircraft carrier, 8 battleships, and numerous cruisers and destroyers. This astounding success was possible only because America built submarines at a rate that far outstripped Japan's ability to sink them or even to build their own. Japan began the war with a larger submarine fleet than the United States, but built only 126 submarines during the entire conflict. America, on the other hand, built 203. Every month of accelerated construction mattered immensely. Every week a submarine reached the fleet sooner translated into another week hunting enemy shipping, another critical blow to the enemy's logistical lifeline. The Essex-class aircraft carrier program showed similar dramatic patterns. The United States Navy had a mere 7 aircraft carriers in December 1941. By August 1945, the Navy possessed an astonishing 99 aircraft carriers of all types, a testament to an unparalleled shipbuilding effort. The 24 Essex-class fleet carriers, each capable of carrying up to 90 aircraft, formed the formidable backbone of this force. The fast carrier task forces, built around these powerful Essex-class carriers, dominated the Pacific from mid-1943 onward. These mighty ships shelled Japanese positions, launched devastating airstrikes, provided crucial air cover for amphibious landings, and engaged Japanese naval forces in decisive history-making battles. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, famously dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, saw carrier-borne aircraft destroy over 600 Japanese planes. This overwhelming victory was possible only because America had more carriers, built faster and deployed sooner, in the right place at the right time. Faster construction unequivocally enabled faster deployment, a direct link between the factory floor and the battlefield. The D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious assault in history, required an armada of 7,000 ships and landing craft. This monumental undertaking was possible only because American and British shipyards built landing craft by the thousands at a blistering pace. These landing ships were crude utilitarian vessels, flat-bottomed boats designed to run directly onto beaches and discharge vital cargo and troops. But they required rapid construction and utterly reliable fittings. Stud-welding proved ideal for landing craft construction. Cargo ramps, davit mounts, deck fittings, and hundreds of other components could all be installed quickly and securely. Nelson's technology, initially invented to solve a specific submarine deck attachment problem, found widespread and critical applications throughout the entire landing craft fleet, silently contributing to the success of one of history's most pivotal military operations. After VE Day in May 1945, with victory in Europe secured, attention shifted fully and irrevocably to the Pacific. The planned invasion of Japan, codenamed Operation Downfall, was scheduled for November 1945. This monumental operation would have required more ships, more landing craft, and more logistic support than any previous campaign in history. Shipyards across America prepared for yet another unprecedented surge in production. Then, on August 6 and 9, 1945, atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Imperial Japan, facing utter destruction, surrendered unconditionally. On August 15, 1945, World War II finally ended. The massive military production machine, which had driven the nation for 4 years, began winding down with breathtaking speed. War contracts were canceled almost overnight. Workers were laid off in droves. Shipyards closed their gates or rapidly converted to peacetime production, facing a radically different economic landscape. The Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation, which had employed over 400 workers at its peak, now faced an uncertain, potentially catastrophic future. Military orders dried up almost overnight, threatening to unravel everything Ted Nelson had built. But Ted Nelson, ever the visionary, had prepared for this moment. Even amidst the frantic, all-consuming demands of the war years, he had been thinking ahead, meticulously considering peacetime applications for stud welding. He understood that his technology was not limited to shipbuilding. Any industry that fabricated steel structures could benefit immensely from faster, stronger attachment methods. construction, bridges, skyscrapers, industrial tanks, pressure vessels, automotive manufacturing. The possibilities were vast and virtually limitless. Nelson, demonstrating his remarkable adaptability, pivoted his company to civilian markets with a focused intensity. He aggressively marketed his stud welding systems to construction companies, steel fabricators, and industrial manufacturers across the nation. The burgeoning post-war construction boom provided new fertile ground. America was embarking on an ambitious program of building highways, bridges, towering skyscrapers, and sprawling suburbs. All of these required extensive steel fabrication and efficient attachment solutions. By 1948, Nelson's company had successfully navigated the challenging transition to peacetime production. The business, while smaller in scale than during its wartime peak, was stable, profitable, and steadily growing. The company continued to innovate, developing new stud designs, refining its welding guns, and creating specialized applications for diverse industries. In 1950, recognizing the vast potential and needing to scale further, Ted Nelson made the decision to sell his company to TRW, a large, diversified industrial conglomerate. The sale made Nelson financially secure, allowing him to retire from active management, though he remained an influential consultant. Crucially, the Nelson name, synonymous with quality and innovation, remained prominently on the product line. TRW continued to market Nelson's stud welding equipment, leveraging the powerful brand recognition Nelson had meticulously built. Over the subsequent decades, the company changed hands several times, a common trajectory in the corporate world. TRW sold the division to Farsantech Incorporated in 2000. Doncasters Group Limited acquired Farsantech in 2007. Most recently, Stanley Black & Decker, a global leader in tools and industrial solutions, purchased the industrial division in 2018. Through all these corporate changes, the iconic Nelson brand survived, a testament to the enduring power and relevance of Ted Nelson's original invention. Today, Stanley Engineered Fastening manufactures and markets Nelson stud welding products globally, a silent, ubiquitous force in modern construction and manufacturing. The technology pioneered by Ted Nelson in his humble garage in Vallejo remains in widespread use worldwide. While modern stud welding is undoubtedly more sophisticated than Nelson's original design, incorporating advanced inverter power supplies for precise arc control, automated systems for high-volume production, and even robotic welders in automotive assembly plants, the fundamental principle remains exactly the same. A stud, a flux cap, a spring-loaded gun, and an electrical arc. 1 second per stud. No scaffolding required. The applications have expanded far beyond the confines of shipbuilding. Construction workers routinely use stud welding to attach metal decking to massive steel beams in towering skyscrapers, forming the floors of modern cities. Bridge builders employ it for securing guardrail posts and lighting mounts, enhancing safety and infrastructure. Nuclear power plants utilize it for attaching cable trays and vital equipment supports, where reliability is paramount. Automotive manufacturers integrate it throughout vehicle bodies for grounding points, trim attachment, and countless other fastening needs. The technology Nelson invented to solve a specific naval construction problem during wartime has found essential applications in virtually every industry that works with steel, a truly universal solution born from a singular vision. But perhaps the most touching and direct legacy of Nelson's invention is found in the ongoing restoration of historic ships. The battleship USS Texas, one of only 7 remaining ships to have proudly served in both World Wars, is currently undergoing extensive restoration at a dry dock facility. The ship requires immense work to repair corroded hull plates and deteriorated fittings. The restoration team discovered that modern Nelson stud welding equipment is ideally suited for this delicate yet robust work. They can attach new steel plates and components using the very same technology Ted Nelson invented over 80 years ago, a bridge across time. Similarly, the submarine USS Pampanito, a decorated World War II boat now preserved as a museum in San Francisco, utilizes Nelson stud welding for its ongoing maintenance. The boat, moored at the Embarcadero, hosts over 100,000 visitors annually, and keeping the old boat safe and functional requires constant attention. Nelson equipment allows the dedicated volunteer restoration crew to perform welding work efficiently without requiring certified welders for every single task, preserving history with modern efficiency. Ted Nelson lived a long and impactful life, seeing his inventions extend far beyond what he could have possibly imagined that day in 1941 when he sketched his idea in a worn notebook. He witnessed stud welding become standard practice in shipbuilding, a cornerstone of efficiency. He saw it adopted by industries worldwide, transforming manufacturing processes. He saw his own name become synonymous with an entire welding process. He passed away in 1994 at the age of 89. Having lived long enough to witness the end of the Cold War and the profound transformation of the world his generation had fought so valiantly to preserve. The statistics of his achievement tell only part of the story. 50 million man-hours saved, 2 Army-Navy E awards, thousands of ships built faster, billions of studs manufactured. But mere numbers cannot fully capture the true immeasurable impact. Behind those cold statistics were countless sailors who returned home because their submarine was completed in time to join the fleet and protect them. Marines who survived perilous assaults because landing craft were available when and where they were needed. Families who were not torn apart by prolonged conflict because the war, in part due to such industrial efficiencies, ended sooner. The true measure of innovation is not just the efficiency gained, but the lives preserved, the suffering averted, the futures safeguarded. Ted Nelson, the 11-a-day welder who was repeatedly told his idea was impractical, saved more lives through his ingenuity than many combat heroes did through direct action. He did it not with weapons, but with welding, not through destruction, but through construction, not through force, but through efficiency. The rejection he faced was not unique, nor is it uncommon. History is filled with innovators and visionaries who were initially dismissed, ridiculed, or ignored by established authorities. Wilbur and Orville Wright were told by experts that powered flight was an impossibility, a fool's errand. Henry Ford was laughed at for suggesting that automobiles could be mass-produced, a luxury item for the wealthy. Chester Carlson spent years trying and failing to sell his xerography process before finally finding a buyer. What made Nelson different, what set him apart, was his unwavering refusal to accept rejection. He did not waste his precious time arguing with stubborn bureaucrats. He did not expend his energy trying to convince entrenched skeptics. He simply quit his job, risked his meager savings, and proved unequivocally that his concept worked. Then, and only then, did the undeniable forces of the market and the urgent demands of war do the convincing for him. This, in its purest form, is the essence of American innovation. Not waiting for permission, not slavishly following established, often outdated procedures, not passively accepting that things must be done the way they have always been done. It is about identifying a profound problem, developing an elegant and practical solution, and then possessing the courage and tenacity to implement that solution, regardless of institutional resistance or personal risk. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, the very place where Nelson worked and where his idea was initially rejected, finally closed its gates in 1996. After 142 years of unparalleled service. Over its lifetime, the yard built an astonishing 512 ships and repaired thousands more, playing a pivotal role in every major American conflict. The yard was responsible for the construction of 44 submarines, including the last nuclear submarine built in California, the USS Drum, launched in 1970. The base was declared a California Historical Landmark in 1960, and parts were designated a National Historic Landmark District in 1975, preserving its immense legacy. Today, the former shipyard is being redeveloped as a vibrant commercial and residential area. Some of the historic buildings remain, including the chapel, the massive dry docks, and impressive industrial structures. Walking through these preserved spaces, visitors can still vividly imagine the frantic, tireless activity of the war years, when tens of thousands of workers built submarines and warships around the clock, fueled by patriotism and ingenuity. In Building 46, the old pipe shop that operated until 1984, there is now a small, carefully curated museum. Among the exhibits are tools, faded photographs, and various artifacts from the shipyard's rich history. Yet, there is no specific exhibit about Ted Nelson. No monument stands to honor the welder who saved 50 million man-hours. His extraordinary story is largely forgotten, except among a small circle of welding professionals and maritime historians. This anonymity, however, would probably not have bothered Nelson in the slightest. He was not seeking fame or personal recognition. He was fundamentally solving a problem. He was making things work better. He was doing his vital part to help his country win a war. The undeniable fact that his solution worked, that it saved immense amounts of time and countless lives, that it fundamentally changed an entire industry, those were reward enough for him. But there is a profound, timeless lesson here for every generation. Innovation, the engine of progress, often comes from the most unexpected places. It emerges not always from credentialed experts cloistered in ivory towers, but frequently from working people who confront problems every single day, intimately understand their nuances, and intuitively know how to fix them. It springs not solely from corporate research laboratories, but from humble garage workshops where tinkerers, driven by curiosity and necessity, experiment tirelessly until they discover breakthroughs. It arrives not exclusively through official, often rigid, channels, but from bold individuals willing to risk everything on an idea they know, deep in their bones, is right. The next great innovation, the next world-changing solution, might very well come from a welder in a shipyard, a mechanic in a garage, a nurse in a hospital, or a teacher in a classroom. It might come from someone official channels dismiss as unqualified, someone bureaucrats tell to slavishly follow procedures, someone experts confidently assure is wasting their time on an impossible problem. History, in its undeniable wisdom, suggests we should listen to these people, not because all their ideas will work or all their gambles will pay off, but because the occasional brilliant idea that does work can change everything, fundamentally altering the course of human endeavor. Ted Nelson's ceramic flux cap was, in its essence, just a small piece of ceramic. His welding gun was, mechanically, just a simple spring-loaded tool. But combined, they achieved a synergistic miracle. They eliminated scaffolding, saved immense amounts of time, dramatically increased safety, vastly improved quality, and most crucially, accelerated ship production at an absolutely critical moment in history. 50 million man-hours, 5,700 years. That is the astonishing quantifiable legacy of what one Welder's initially rejected idea ultimately saved. And that number represents only the direct construction time savings. It does not begin to account for the immeasurable strategic impact of faster ship deployment. It does not measure the countless lives saved because submarines reach the Pacific sooner, engaging the enemy more effectively. It does not calculate the profound morale boost derived from seeing ambitious production goals not just met, but decisively exceeded. It does not quantify the deterrent effect of American naval power growing faster and more formidable than enemies anticipated. The full holistic impact of Ted Nelson's invention may never be fully calculated, but we can say with absolute certainty that America's victory in World War II depended as much on its unparalleled industrial capacity and ingenuity as it did on its military valor. The battles, yes, were won by brave soldiers, sailors, and Marines, but the war itself was won by the tireless workers, brilliant engineers, and daring innovators like Ted Nelson. People who saw a problem and fixed it, who refused to accept inefficiency when efficiency was clearly possible, who understood with an acute sense of urgency that in total war, every minute saved in production translated directly to lives saved in combat. As we face the complex challenges of the 21st century climate change, resource scarcity, crumbling infrastructure, technological disruption, this lesson remains profoundly relevant. The solutions we desperately need will come not solely from elite universities and corporate laboratories, but from working people who see problems clearly, intimately understand their context, and possess the practical knowledge to develop workable, scalable fixes. The next Ted Nelson might be designing a better solar panel in a garage workshop, driven by a passion for clean energy. The next breakthrough in manufacturing might come from a factory worker who knows exactly what process is wasting time and energy on the assembly line. The next revolution in efficiency might originate with someone official channels have already dismissed as unqualified, too unconventional, or simply not part of the established order. We need to listen to these voices. We need to actively encourage innovation from all sources, not just the usual suspects. We need to drastically reduce the bureaucratic and financial barriers that too often stand between problem identification and solution implementation. We need to remember that some of the most important and transformative innovations in human history came from people working outside the system, precisely because the system itself refused to listen or adapt. Ted Nelson started as an 11-a-day welder, a humble worker with dirty hands and a restless mind. He ended as a millionaire industrialist whose game-changing technology saved his country at its most vulnerable moment. Yet, he never forgot his roots. He never adopted airs or claimed to be anything more than a mechanic who saw a problem and fixed it. In his later years, when asked about his incredible success, he would often shrug with characteristic humility and say, "I just made a better mousetrap. The world beat a path to my door." It wasn't genius, he would claim, it was just common sense. But common sense, when applied at precisely the right moment, with unwavering courage and relentless persistence, can fundamentally change history. That is Ted Nelson's true legacy. Not just the 50 million hours saved, not just the 2 E awards with stars, not just the global company that still proudly bears his name. His legacy is the undeniable proof that one person with a good idea and the sheer determination to implement it can make an enormous, lasting difference. That legacy lives on every time a welder pulls the trigger on a stud welding gun, creating an instantaneous, invisible bond. Every time a ship is built faster, safer, and stronger than the old methods allowed. Every time someone looks at an inefficient process, a frustrating bottleneck, and dares to ask, there has to be a better way. Ted Nelson asked that question in 1941, amidst the clanging chaos of a wartime shipyard. His powerful answer, forged in his garage and then scaled into an industrial revolution, helped win a war. What questions are you asking today? And more importantly, when the experts tell you it cannot be done, when the bureaucrats tell you to follow rigid procedures, when the skeptics dismiss your audacious idea, will you have the courage, the tenacity, the sheer will to prove them wrong? The history of innovation, vibrant and inspiring, suggests that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ignore the experts. Trust your own keen observations, believe in your own capabilities, and build the solution you know with absolute certainty will work. Ted Nelson did exactly that. And 80 years later, welders around the world still use his invention every single day, a constant hum of his enduring genius. And somewhere, perhaps in another humble garage or a bustling workshop, the next Ted Nelson is sketching an idea that everyone says will not work. But they will be wrong. Because the best innovations do not come from following established procedures. They come from people who see a problem, know how to fix it, and refuse to take no for an answer.